All right, it's Movember, the 11th of the 11th, so it's Remembrance Day here, so pay my respects to all the people who have served and given their lives for our country. It's also Movember, and tonight's video I'm going to do just based on a bit of an excerpt out of Facing Addiction. I work with a lot of addicts, and of all descriptions, process or chemical. And generally, as Patrick Carnes puts out in his research, he says that there's an 87% chance if someone has one addiction, they've got two or more. And this is largely because we know now that addiction is a disease of the brain's reward, motivational, and memory circuitry, which is defined by the American Medical Association. So if you want to look up more there, by all means, that's the place to find it. So tonight I want to just pull two things out of this book. Generally, the two most asked questions for addicts when they sort of arrive in a place like a therapist's office is, well, am I an addict or not? And the other question is, well, how did this happen? Where did it come from? So I'm going to do two things tonight. One is the making of an addict, and the other is what is the recognizing addiction and the criteria, which is just as a tool in this book. So, recognizing addiction. When a person has developed an addiction, you will usually see certain destructive behaviors. These are: 1, compulsive use. If the alcohol, drugs, sex, food, etc. is available, the addict uses too much of it and uses it too often. The second thing is impaired control, that when an addict tries to use, control is lost, and usually a single use is followed by many more. As is often heard in Narcotics Anonymous, 1 use is too many and 1,000 is never enough. Continued use in spite of harm or consequence. Addicts keep using chemicals, drugs, alcohol, food, sex, whatever it is, when it causes health, relationship, job, and legal problems. The next one is craving, the phenomenon of craving. The desire for alcohol or drugs or other processed addictions can change in intensity from minute to minute. It can even seem to disappear during abstinent periods, but using even a tiny amount can wake up the craving and trigger continued use. And people, places, and things associated with use in the past can also wake up cravings. One of the things I certainly get from addicts is they'll lose that craving and they'll come in and say, wow, this is awesome, it's gone. I think maybe I wasn't an addict after all. And I just remind them, be careful. This could be actually the criteria of addiction that you've lost in periods of abstinence. We can lose the craving altogether. What lets us know whether we're an addict or not is whether once we come across people, places, or things, or use a little bit of that substance or process again, we're up and running again. So it's hard to. The absence of the craving isn't a good, safe indicator. And the last one is denial. There is a saying in addiction that the only disease that tells you that you don't. Let me say that again. It's late tonight. Denial. There is a saying that addiction is the only disease that tells you that you don't have it. The degree that an addict can minimize drug use or consequences is one of the most striking and common manifestations of addiction, as well as the most baffling for others. Breaking through this denial is an important component of addiction treatment. It's one of the powerful sentences of Patrick Carnes. The degree that an addict can minimize use and consequence is one of the most striking and common manifestations of addiction, but it's the most baffling to others. So even when I get someone here that's in a pre-contemplative stage of change, and I might do a video on stages of change just as a tool, but to the purpose of tonight, if someone's here in the hicks, they have to be, they're pre-contemplative, it's like, look, how long is this going to go? I just have to appease my wife, boss, the law, whatever. Generally what you can ask is, well, who else wants them to be here and how baffled are they? And that's another angle you can take to sort of get to the truth of the addiction. So the Am I an Addict? People who are using too much often wonder whether they are really addicted. They wonder whether they're having a problem with substance abuse or substance dependence or process addictions. It is possible that you may be having both problems. The main difference between the two is the increased tolerance and withdrawal symptoms are part of the diagnosis of dependency. Typically, an individual starts abusing an addiction and then or a process or substance, and then they progress to dependency. So there's the criteria of addiction, and generally that question, the most asked question of am I an addict or am I just having a problem here? The next thing I wanted to put into this piece is the making of an addict. Now Carnes has, and I'll try and hold this still just for a second and get it up, and I'll put this, it's figure 2.4 in Patrick's book. And he talks about the making of an addict, and he has this cyclical sort of model. And he says this model can be a flow chart with factors that compound addiction potentially, or any one problem area could be the catalyst for a manifestation of addiction or a manifestation of addictive behavior. So you could have this occurring sort of systemic approach, or, with some addictions like pornography or crystal meth, it can just impact from adult exposure and take over and really impact the brain in a catastrophic way. So I just want to take you through this model and its main heading. So the first one is childhood trauma and stresses. Living in fear or chaos leaves children living in a crisis mode. Sexual, physical, or emotional abuse or neglect can contribute to becoming an addict, and early losses and catastrophes. Because sometimes people come from pretty good enough parenting, but then someone dies in a car accident, or someone gets cancer, and now mum's got to work, and now the kids are in daycare, and boom, the family system's decimated. So childhood trauma and stresses. Now that can lead to early exposure issues, so teen drinking, teen smoking, teen drug use, teen internet use, gambling, sexual, physical, or emotional abuse or neglect, and then the culture that someone's put into can have a major effect on setting someone up for addiction. We move on then to adult trauma and stresses. War, natural disaster, divorce, loss of a partner, loss of a job, victim of violent crime, loss of a child, chronic illness and disability. All these things can contribute and exacerbate the circumstances. Genetics, fewer dopamine receptors, novelty gene, family members with addiction can all play a part in this. And this is where a therapist will largely do a genogram when someone comes in. They really want to know what that family tree is in regards to mental health and addiction issues. Learning and modeling, growing up in a family in which adults had excessive behavior, the modeling confirms that this is how to do life and handle feelings. So, you grow up, you see addiction. We had an ad in Australia where it went over generations, where a father asked a son to go get a beer and then go get a beer. And so the different generations carried that on as in a generational trauma sort of model. And then the attachment, issues, the underpinning childhood trauma and stress is that there's a failure to bond with parents or primary caregivers during the first 2 years of life, inability to establish attachment. So what we've got here is it will take you some time to understand how you acquired your addiction. In order to start making change, you simply have to start with the fact that you do have an addiction problem. The upcoming chapters in this book certainly go on and help to further your understanding. And just recognizing that you have a problem is a major step in recovery, and it requires a commitment to take each new step. So it is a good thing to work out where you've come from and to dive into this and get to the bottom of it. And it is good to identify what that criteria of addiction is to answer that question, am I an addict or am I just abusing this substance? But what here is it is basically outlining is that change is largely in the beginning behavioral. If I can identify that I've got a problem, make the behavioral changes, make life as safe as I can, get into a program of recovery, then I can start to dive deeper into these underlying issues. So, short but sweet. I will pull more out of this Facing Addiction, Facing the Shadow by Patrick Carnes. I usually do an annual, a few tools of Patrick's, which is the cycle of addiction and cycle of recovery. Hope this is useful. It is MOvember. The Mo's in 11 days in, we're getting there. It's going to be nice. No need for wax or twisting yet. Nothing to go with. Be gentle with your heart. Reach out for people in recovery. Reach out for support. And I look forward to seeing you again in another MOvember video. Bye for now.